Hello and welcome. I want to do a series of small primer tutorials in getting acquainted with Blender if you're completely new to it. So this is going to be a bit of a beginner. And I'm going to try and tailor it towards 2D artists because 3D is something of a mystery. When I first started, I have a 2D design background primarily, and I started using Blender extensively 3 years ago, and it was kind of hard for me to find tutorials that cater towards a mindset that you've built up using Photoshop or whatever 2D application you've been using, because there's a lot of terminology that's a bit different. The workflows are kind of odd, but once you start getting used to it and understanding some of the basic terminology and basic workflows, hopefully you'll start wrangling this beast. And so when you boot up Blender, the first thing you'll see at the time of this recording, I'm using Blender 2.90. You'll see this thing here. You can start out. These new files here dictate what you kind of want. So it's just basically what layout we'll set up. In general, it's basically what we'll be using if you want to create 3D models, 2D animation. It's grease pencil, lots of tutorials on that, sculpting, VFX, and yes, surprisingly, video editing. Your recent files will be here. You can send money to development funds. You can see in your patch notes. If somehow you quit unexpectedly, you can recover the last session, and you can open files. You don't have to click on any of these. You can just click here and it'll default to the general layout. So what are we greeted here? Well, we are greeted with the most famous and memed about default cube. Amazing. We also have a camera here and a single point light. We are also currently in viewport shading, which doesn't take into account any actual shading. If we click the drop down menu here, you can see that we have a plethora of options ready for VizDev. We can select like a different kind of lighting source here, and it's kind of hard to see what it is with a cube. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to do screencast keys so you can see what I'm clicking on here. And another thing is I use Blender 2.79 or sorry 2.7x hotkeys because that's what I started with, and it may vary a little bit from 2.8. But to access it from Blender Preferences, go to Key Map, Blender 2.7x. You can still follow along if you have 2.8. Some things may be slightly different. But I've used Blender since I think 2.6 days and on and off. So I'm used to these controls here. The big difference is that left click is to move the 3D cursor right here, as you can see, and right click is to select, which can be very confusing if you're from other programs. I've brought up this menu here, so I'm just going to return the cursor to the world origin. More of that later. Alright, so I was mentioning about the viewport shading. So you can see I have a studio, we have our matcap, where you can import your own stuff or create your own or use one of the variety of things here, and we just have flat. So let me hide that because we don't need that. Let's go back to matcap and let's add in a mesh. As you can see, I've brought up a hotkey, Shift A, mesh, add mesh right here. I like using I love using hotkeys. I believe they are great for workflows, but if you're starting out and if you're having a hard time keep up with this stuff, I'll also show you the other way. So instead of hitting Shift A to add a mesh, there's an option up here, add. Whoops. And you can add a mesh through here. Now, one thing to note is that you'll see a lot more things I have here is because I have a lot of add-ons currently on. And another thing to note is the 3D cursor can be seen as like the creation point of all meshes. So if I put a 3D cursor here, I'm just going to navigate to here, add mesh cube, it's going to be created right here. Cool thing about this 3D cursor is that if I select the top of the mesh, you can see it's kind of sticking on slightly. So if I go back up here, add mesh cube, it intersects right with the mesh here. And let's keep it default cube because it's kind of like a sin to delete this. I might delete it in the end. Alright, so let's do snap cursor to world origin. And let's use our hotkeys. Let's just hide this because we don't delete default cube. We do Shift A, add, and let's add a UV sphere. And I can see it's kind of intersecting. There's a lot of stuff here. One thing that took me a while to realize is if you look down here, there's something called Add UV Sphere. If we bring this up, you can see there's a plethora of options here. I'm going to actually move this. Can I move this over here? Window, region. Yes, let's move this right in the center. So there's a bunch of options here, which you can manipulate. As you can see here, it kind of changes the shape. Usually in 3D, you kind of want to have like a good foundation of something you're going to be building, and well, rather than, let's say, having the default property of 32 and start deleting segments and building off of this, you can really just have a good base. You can get like really interesting shapes this way. So segments, we can have like the different shapes like this. We can change the size of this radius here. Rotation. This you can do all in post, unless you have something very specific. Or I think if you get into Python scripting, you can use these properties. It's a whole lot of things you can do. But we're just learning how to create the basic stuff. Alright, so we have a sphere here. It's generated here. And once you right click out of it, you don't have access to that anymore. So you're kind of stuck with this, which can be a little problematic at times. So let's just start manipulating. So G is the move modifier, and you can lock it to an axis of your choosing, which is kind of easy. So if you look up here with a gizmo, you can see X is here, Y is here, which corresponds to the colors in the screen. So if you just want to lock it and move it to the Y axis, G, Y, and it's locked here. The reason for that is if I just hit G, you can see it kind of moves all over the place, and it's doing its best to guess where you want the object to be. But if we do like this, we have finer control of where it should be, or where you want it to be. Let's move that over here. Let's create a new sphere. And it takes, as you can see, it keeps the same properties here, but I'm just going to default back to what I think it was before. Excellent. Okay. So currently, this is hard edged. You can see like all the segments and hard edges protruding out. If you want it smooth shaded, we can spacebar, type in smooth, and shade smooth. Another cool thing here is it shows you where you can access this object and shade smooth. So I can just click this here and shade smooth. But if I go to object, and it said right here, shade flat, object, shade, smooth. This is something that looks pretty desirable, and you can bounce between the two depending on the kind of effects you want. We can go to studio here. You can start playing around with all this other stuff here. There's so much cool options here. Madcap as well, like I mentioned. Getting that ZBrush look. Alright, so we can move this around. Let's add in a cube now. Or, actually, we hit the cube here, and it's a good point to talk about the outliner. Over here is the outliner, which can almost be seen as, if you're coming from a 2D background, like your layers folder. Collections can be seen as your folders that you can contain everything in. You can create new collections here and name them as something else, like default cube home. You can drag them in here, and now this is just a way to like tidy up things. Like if I want to hide everything here, it just hides all of this. Bring this back up, and let's bring this here, and the default cube is back. Anyway, so that's what I like to use. You can also drag layers into another collection. Sorry, you can drag a collection into another collection and really start fine-tuning it. So, this is called collection. We can call this scene. We can have the default cube here. We can see what else we have here. We can also click on objects here, hit M to move, new collection, and sphere. And now we have the spheres here. But it's outside of the collection, so again, we can just drag this back in here. Just basic cleanup foundation stuff, because once you start like, oh man, I don't know about you, but sometimes my Photoshop layers or anything starts getting kind of wacky, so it's always nice to get ahead with that, So I have spheres here, sphere 01, sphere here, Okay, excellent. Still kind of boring stuff, I know, but this is still like the primer here. So we have the default cube here. We talked about the move modifier, G, GX, GY, GZ. That's to lock in the modifiers. Now the next thing is R, which is rotate. You can rotate things around, you can click, Control Z to go back, RX to lock on the X axis so it rotates this way, RY so it rotates on the Y axis. And RZ so it rotates on the Z or Z axis. And the last one is scale, which is S. So you can scale it like this, lower, raise it, SZ, scale on the Z axis, XX, SX, scale X, S, Y, so Y axis. This is all done, as you can see, in the object mode. But how do we manipulate faces, vertices, and edges? We have to go into edit mode, which we can access with object edit mode. But now, I talked about hotkeys. A great hotkey is the tab key. This is something we'll be using a lot. We can tab in and out. With the tab key, we have access to, all the verts here. We can change the selections. So from vertices, we can use edges, or we can use faces. The hotkey I like to use is Control Tab, and we can quickly select it this way. I think in 2.8 controls you can access with 1, 2, 3. But I'll use this kind of key. So, what can we do with this? Well, we can select a single edge, bring it down, and look at that. You've manipulated a shape here. This could almost be half a house, or actually a building right now. If we drag this down like this, again, if I'm going too fast, I've just used I've selected the face, I've locked it on the Z axis, I hit G, and I've just dragged it down. And, even with this basic shape here, we can start playing around with it. So we only have access to 4. So let's see, what else can we do? We can drag a single point down. We can have this kind of like a corner piece here. That's pretty cool. Let's drag this back up, move it over here. And this is something I like to do. Is like once I create something, I like to move it off to the side because I might reuse it later on somewhere. This is my own specific workflow. So if we make another cube, let's tab in. Let's practice with. I used edges here, so let's use vertex. So if I drag, manipulate this like that. And it might not be even because we didn't select the edge, but if we want some asymmetry, we can just do something like that. It's completely fine. Like that. You can also have access to the other modifiers like scale and rotate. So if we scale this on the Y axis, SY, we can scale it in like this. Scale this in with the Z axis. That looks kind of cool. Let's move this over here. Add a new cube. Tab in. Face mode. Control tab face. Click S. We can scale it in on all axes. And look, you kind of like have a foundational base here. What else can we do here? We can rotate it. RZ, rotate it slightly like this. And again, we're building a little bit of a base here. Let's add another one. Cube. Now I'm going to teach you another fun tool, which is the extrude. To access that, you just hit E. So we have to select a face first. You can extrude faces, vertices, and edges. Each of them have their own specific needs, but for starting out, I just recommend using faces. So we're gonna click on a face, hit E, and now if we GZ, you can see we've selected and created a new face right here. Again, with all extrude, you can see it's already locked in automatically, so we can just hit 1 and it moves it up 1 blender unit or 1 meter. I think mine's set on meters. So let's try that again. E, and let's say 2. And you can see it's moved here. E, 2. E, 2. So now we're starting to build like something interesting here. And if we start selecting edges, we can select multiple edges. To select multiple things, we just hold the shift key. So if I select edge here,
select edge here, shift select G, Z, and move it down, you can see we're starting to manipulate things. You can also see it's starting to affect this edge here. But this is something we will get into much later. Right now, at the end of the day, we don't have to worry about this unless you're using it for interactive media. We're after just the overall shape. So that's kind of neat. Look, we've created something a little bit more complex. Let's bring this over here and rotate this way. 180. Another thing I haven't mentioned is that all of these objects here are, the parameters are accessed here. You can see this is scale to 4.9. This is even out to 5. This one here, you can see it's 270. If you do 0, nothing happens, but we can rotate it here. This is if you want to be a little bit more specific and have, want to keep your numbers like quite even. So this is at 16 points. So let's do 16, moves it here. Keeps everything kind of simple. And if this is more comfortable for you to work with, you can definitely manipulate this way. So let's continue adding. We're getting a bit more complex here. So we've learned how to iterate, to manipulate with edges, with vertices, GZ, rotate, scale. We can do that with edges, G, R to rotate, G to move, S to scale, and we can do it with faces. Faces, S scale, R rotate, and G to move. We've also learned how to move up with the extrude tool with E for extrude, and we can move it up. Now, if you don't want it to go with a normal, you can just click and it'll still be selected here, and we can just move it up. You can rotate this again. You can see we're starting to get a bit of a complex shape. There's something in 3D though, like I'm going to talk about here, is like this gets a little complicated because we need more supporting loops. And what a loop is basically that, just like a line across the mesh itself, because it's starting to break here. Like there's some space that kind of looks wonky, like you'd think there should be an edge here, but there isn't. So it's kind of acting in a very odd way. To add edges, it's Control R, and we can add an edge here. You can see instantly it knows like it's pinching this over here. Add another one here. Now it's starting to make sense of how this form should look like. Again, with all things, we can select the vertex and start manipulating it this way. And now I've like created a whole block of text here. Move this way here. So hopefully that should be a basic primer. To wrap up this video, I'm just gonna create a, let's say, basic house with what we've learned. So I'm gonna select everything here, hide it. Let's create a new collection. Select this collection, Shift A. Let's add a cube in, so it's in here. Let's practice standard naming conventions, which is one I'm making up right now. We'll call this house base. I'm going to also teach you how I like to break things up too. So we have a basic square here, or not square, a cube. Forgive me, my dimensional friend. So I'm going to also move this screencast slightly off to the side here. Alright. Okay. So we have our screencast key here. Let us start using what we've learned. So I'm going to use the move tool, GX. Move this a little bit this way. GY, move it this way. I talked about creating edge loops with R. So we can Control R and click in the middle here. And once you click, you can start moving it around. Let's say I want it about over here. And let's say if I click on this edge, GZ, move it up. Look at that. We have a house. Ta-da, done. No, just joking. Alright, what else can we do? We can add maybe 2 more edge loops this way. Select this face, extrude it out to X. And then we can select this edge and drag it down slightly like this. That's kind of looking neat. See, we've already created like a really fun complex form here. What else can we do here? Well, we could... Ah, yes. We could create something this way. So I'll hit E, G, Y, move it this way. And then we want to manipulate this vertex. Let's just move it down slightly like this. So it creates a bit of a corner here. Now this is kind of acting a bit finicky. So we'll add an edge loop this way. And maybe one this way here. I know if you are more familiar with this 3D modeling, you know there's easier ways to do this, but for those who aren't, eventually it gets easier. I'm just showing you the ways with what I've taught currently. Don't want to jump ahead too much. That's one thing I found while learning, is like there's a lot of information overload at times. So yeah, play around with the tools you have, and then eventually there are easier methods to learn, but it's always good to understand how to create it like this. So I mean, we have a basic shape here. I mean, afterwards, now you can kind of like start assigning material, slapping it on, which will all be covered later on. Just to show you an easier way of doing stuff like this, I mean, I can create a cube here, just to show off. You know, do this like this, and then I can add in, you know, like cut it like this. This, and then eventually you can do something like this. For more complex form. Alright, hopefully this is a good primer. Learned quite a bit, hopefully. See you in the next video. Thank you.